Hello and welcome to the channel. My name's King. You're watching the YouTube channel The Red King, and today I'm gonna talk to you and hopefully explain how to build an epic fleet in the grand strategy game Stellaris. We're going to go through the early game when we're sort of using corvettes and when we're skirmishing with our opponents. We're then going to move on to the mid game, the mid to late game, and then the late game. And hopefully by the end of it, you guys will be able to build a fleet such as the one that you're currently looking at, which is a 950k fleet strength fleet. So we will start with the early game, and for that we need to be looking at corvettes. So the corvette is the first ship that will be available to you when you start the game, and this is kind of like the equivalent of a fighter, a bit like a fighter plane. When you start out, obviously it's all you've got. It's good, it's quick, it has some high evasion stats, and you can kit it out quite nicely. Depending on your playstyle, what you want to do, I mean, obviously it depends on how you want to play. I tend to find that using a defensive fleet at the start of the game is best for me. I quite like the sort of high research yield civilizations. I'm not too interested in conquering my opponents early on. I find that to be a little bit counterproductive, particularly when playing on Grand Admiral, as the resource gains that my opponents have is super high. So I find the best thing to do early on is make friends with everybody, and then you don't need to worry about this too much. But for those of you who do want to go out and conquer other planets early, you're going to need a fleet to do it. So corvettes is what we've got. So the first thing you need to do is go into ship designer. Now the only one that you'll see will be corvette, and probably when you'll see it you'll have this auto generate designs ticked, and what that does is it makes the game's AI basically generates a ship design for you. Now that may or may not be useful for you. It depends how experienced you are in the game. I would recommend that you turn that off and you learn how to play with the ship and work it how you need it to be. So the main thing you need to be looking at when you're making a ship is this thing at the top. So this is the section. On a corvette, it's really straightforward. You just have one section. You can be a missile boat, an interceptor, or a picket ship. Now, straight off the bounce, the first few ships you want to make, or rather the first fleet you want to make, you're going to want to be looking at interceptors. The reason being, interceptors have 3 weapon slots, 3 small weapon slots. Missile boats, what they say on the tin, G equals a missile slot, and S is a small weapon. And a picket ship is a point defense slot and 2 weapon slots. So small weapons do what they imagine what they do. They're small lasers, they're small kinetic batteries, gas cannons, etc. And they damage the enemy, either shields, armor, or hull points. Missiles work slightly differently, and in my experience, if I'm going to use missiles, it's going to be in the late game where I want to be taking out battleships and such. I find that if you are doing interceptor or rather corvette on corvette combat, which is what you're going to be doing in the early game, you're much better off going for 3 small weapons. But missiles do have their place, particularly when you can set these guys to swarm later in the game, but we'll get there. Picket ships, you're probably never going to use these. Maybe you'll use them against the Scourge. I mean, maybe it's preference. I personally have never used picket ships. I don't find them to be useful at all. This is, I mean, maybe if you're up against someone who's shooting loads of missiles at you or uses loads of fighter jets coming out the hangar bays and things, maybe. But yeah, that's not something I've ever found I needed to use. So interceptor is almost certainly what you're going to pick straight off the bat, and as you can see, that gives you 3 small weapon slots. Now at the start of the game, I guess I'll give you a little roundabout. We're late game at the moment. You can see we're 2600, but it's going to look more or less the same. You're just going to have fewer options. You're going to have blue lasers, and you're going to have, or maybe not if you haven't researched them, it'd be red laser. I think it's the first one you get. And you're going to have some sort of cannon. I prefer to build 2 lasers and 1 cannon. The simple reason being is at the start of the game, you're not going to have the power for 2 shield sections. you're only going to have the power for one shield section and two armor sections. The power, incidentally, is up here, and this is something that you can unlock through research. So a fission generator, for example, is the first one you can get. So your early game fleets, your straight off the bat fleets, are going to be more or less 2 lasers, 1 kinetic battery, 1 shield. The reason, sorry for the 2 lasers if I didn't make that clear, is because almost all the ships will have 2 armor, and lasers do more damage to armor than they do to shield. So logically it makes sense to balance them out. 2 lasers, 1 cannon, 1 shield, 2 armor. Simple as that. The other thing to look out for, if you unlock it in the early game, is how you want the AI to control your ships when they go into battle. So corvettes have 2 types, two options. They have swarm and they have picket. And as you can see, they give you bonuses. These green, yellow and red, that dictates what level of research you're at. Green is what you'll start out with, yellow is advanced, and then the red is the sapient combat AI that you unlock much later into the game. And as you can see, so Swarm, for example, gives the ship a fire rate of increase 15% and a 25% increase on evasion. If you were to go for Picket, then you're getting the same fire rate increase, but you're also getting a tracking increase as well, and you're getting only a 10% evasion. The other thing to look out for is the range that the ship will advance to. So with Swarm, they're going to point blank range. They will literally, like bees around honey or flies around something else, they will literally swarm around the ship and as close as they possibly can, straightforward. If you go for Picket, they will advance to a 30, I'm not quite sure what the 30 represents in the game, maybe it's kilometers, who knows, but they will advance to 30 essentially, which is very, very close. The small range weapons have a range of 50 to try and give you an indication of how small that is. I think something like the phase disruptor has a range of 30, which is the smallest range in the game, I think. Mr. Mining Laser, that's 30. Yeah, so they will advance to extreme range, extremely close range, but not quite point blank range. Now, for me, if you've unlocked the basics of these, I would always go for Swarm. The added evasion over tracking, which tracking's not super necessary this early into the game, particularly if you're using lasers and cannon, because the tracking is already pretty good and the accuracy is already pretty good. As you can see, accuracy 90, tracking 50, accuracy 75, tracking 50. So, yeah. Oh, interesting. The lasers have a slightly shorter range than the cannons, but there you go. So your early game fleet, you're going to be looking at a swarm of corvettes, lasers, 1 cannon, shield, armor. And that's pretty much it. And if you are looking to be aggressive, then you'll build lots of them. If you're looking to be defensive, you'll build a fleet size of around 20, depending on who's close to you. I mean, if you've got purifiers near you, well, you need to armor up, so to speak, because they're going to attack you. Okay, so advancing into we're still in the early game, but we've unlocked the destroyer. So the destroyer is not that different to the corvette. It's essentially the same thing, but you unlock another slot. So what that means is you can, using the first section, you can go for a gunship bow, an artillery bow, or a picket ship bow. Now, picket ship is largely the same as what we discussed with the corvette. I've never used it. I can't imagine why you'd need to use it, so we're not going to talk about that one too much. The gunship and the artillery are important because when it comes to weapon sizes, you've also got to think about the ships that you're fighting against. So small weapons are more accurate and they track better than large weapons. And what that means is if you're fighting corvettes which have high evasion, you're going to want to use small weapons for 2 reasons. One, the tracking and the accuracy is much better. But secondly, or thirdly, all the corvettes want to do is get to you as quickly as possible and swarm on you. So range is not really an issue. So for that reason, early into the game, I would not look at artillery bow at all. I'll be looking at gunship bow because you get more weapons per ship, which is exactly what you want. At this stage in the game, unless you're well behind, which you shouldn't be, you're only going to be fighting smaller ships. For that reason, you need small weapons. Medium fine. If the odd cruiser comes along, whatever, fine. But gunship bow is what you're looking at. So gunship bow is what we're going to go with. For the second slot, again, I would go interceptor. You could go gunship. If you're behind and you're fighting more cruisers, maybe the medium weapon will be better for you. But 90% of the time at this stage in the game, interceptor is what you're going to be looking at. And very similarly to the corvette, lasers and cannons. That's what you're going to be looking at. Depending on where you are with your power, is going to depend on what you can do with your armor and shields. Personally, particularly at this point in the game, I like to run it equal. Different empires do stack their ships differently. However, it tends not to be that much of an issue unless you're fighting, for example, all militaristic empires. Well, in which case, all of their ships are going to go towards a certain... I believe that militaristic empires are more likely to use kinetic weapons rather than laser weapons. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that is the case. Depending on the ethics of the empire, the AI will build them a certain way. At this point in the game, it's unlikely to matter too much about which way you want to build and dictate your ships. Next, we will move on to the cruisers. So cruisers are sort of, I would say, still fairly early. It depends on how you play, but still fairly early into the game. Nothing too crazy has happened yet. It's almost certainly before the year 2300. I mean, I certainly hope that you're unlocking these before 2300. But these guys give you a little bit more. These guys give you a little bit more choice. I'm just going to point out to anyone who hasn't noticed, these slots here are the gun slots, and they will swivel and track and fire as we go through. So anyway, so we get three choices this time. We get the bow, the core, and the stern. Now, depending on when you unlock these, to a point, it's going to depend on how you want to kit them out, because they give you many, many options. So you can go for an artillery bow, a broadside bow, or a missile bow. The missile bow does what it says, similar to a corvette. It's basically a corvette bolted on front of your ship, two small weapons, and a missile slot. The artillery bow is a large weapon slot, and the broadside bow is two mediums. For me, at this point in the game, I'd be looking to go for a broadside bow, and the reason is the empires I'm fighting are unlikely to have unlocked battleships at this point. I tend not to research missiles. I don't find them particularly useful until later, so it's not an issue at the moment. And large weapons, as I said, they're unlikely to have unlocked battleships. We're probably going to be fighting cruisers, almost certainly destroyers, and almost certainly corvettes. The AI tends to build fleets of maybe, 3 or 4 cruisers, 10 destroyers, 20 corvettes. That tends to be the sort of situation that you're getting. So the large weapons aren't going to give you quite as much bonus at this point in the game. Broadside bow is the way to go. Similarly with the core, now these can go really one of two ways. You can go for a hanger core, broadside core. We won't discuss a missile core for the reasons that we've already talked about. Artillery core. Hanger core is sort of the secret good option, in my opinion. Depending on how advanced your hanger craft are, so your strike craft are, there are 3 levels. I really, really like strike craft. I think they are massively overlooked. I think the range on them is fantastic. I mean, you can see the range on the ship is actually 10, but that's not what I mean. The range at which the ship launches the advanced strike craft is fantastic. So often they'll launch the craft before the ship's even in weapon range. You can't lose advanced strike craft. It's that they're just always there. You're not going to run out. So all the time while the enemy ships are advancing to you, your strike craft are already damaging the enemy ships. So I like advanced strike craft. You'll hear more about these when I talk about battleships. But it does depend on how far along you are with research, because the basic strike craft are not amazing. So that's going to dictate whether you go hanger core or whether you go broadside core. I would normally go broadside core at this point. I'm still playing pretty defensive at this point. I'm not that fussed. I just want to keep my fleet at a point where no one is just going to steamroller me, and everything's pretty chill. Same with the gunship stern. I'll probably take the 2 small over the 1 medium, mostly because of all the corvettes that I know I'm going to have to deal with, and I know that those corvettes are going to be able to close on me before I can destroy them. So I'm going to need some sort of small weapons to deal with them. With these 3, you then get 8 different armor or shield slots. At this point in the game, I would almost always go equal. Occasionally, if I have the power, I'd chuck in another, you can see we've already gone over it, I'll chuck in another shield. But yeah, I mean, it's very preference, and it's not going to make that bigger difference at this point in the game. The reason I like the shield is twofold. One, the shields offer more hit points than the armor does. And the other reason is the shields regenerate, and obviously the armor won't unless you've got hull tissue, which you probably won't at this point in the game. Okay, and then on to the battleships. So when I unlock battleships, I like to do one of 2 things. If I've got a ton of alloys knocking about, I quite like to make a battleship that's completely empty, just a shell. So what I'll do, I'll go new design, battleship. I will pick the sections. Now when you first unlock battleship, you probably won't have the spinal mount bow available to you. This is by far and away the most important section of the ship. You may not have it available when you unlock it. That doesn't matter if you do what I'm about to show you. So you pick, say, artillery bow. Importantly, you don't fill it with weapons, you don't fill it with shields. You do the same up here depending on what you want to do. Let's go artillery core for now, which is 3 large weapons, and we'll go for an artillery stern. So what we have at the moment is a completely blank ship in terms of weapons and in terms of shields and in terms of accessories. You can still select these on the right. I'll talk you through those at a later point. You can still select these. You may as well just have the most up-to-date part that you have in your ship, whatever it might be. But importantly, when you save this, you'll see that the cost is only 574 alloys. Now, to give you an example of how cheap that is, if I was to click on Courage, Courage is currently 1417 alloys. So we are getting the skeleton of a battleship for what, 30% of the cost, or just under 30% of the cost, a third of the cost, which is fantastic for 2 reasons. One, it allows you to get these ships built and produce them, because remember that they take quite a long time. I think they take something like 300 seconds when you first unlock the technology. So by getting them built now, they can just chill in your home system. Obviously they're useless, they don't have any fleet power to them, but they're there ready to upgrade when you need them. So if if someone declares war on you, or some event happens and you need them, it will be significantly quicker to upgrade them than it will be to build them from scratch. And you know that the bulk of the alloys has already been spent. Obviously when you upgrade them, it's going to be expensive, but it's not going to be as expensive as if you had to build 4 fleets worth of ships straight off the bat, and it's going to be significantly quicker as well. Okay, so getting into how I like to build my battleships, let's pretend now that we've unlocked the spinal mount bow. So you're going to go back to your skeleton, you're going to change it to spinal mount bow. This will then ping up an upgrade on the side of the screen for you, and then you're going to have a couple of different options depending on what you've unlocked. Almost certainly the first one you'll unlock is the Tachyon Lance. So the Tachyon Lance is absolutely fantastic. It does minus 50% shield damage, but it does 100% plus damage to armor and 50% plus damage to hull. So if you're fighting something like the Scourge, which don't have shields, I mean, it's a no-brainer. It's a very, very, very powerful weapon. The other important thing to look out on this is the range. The range of this is 150, which is far exceeding all the other weapons, with the exception of the Titan cannon, which we'll come to shortly. The next on the list is the Giga Cannon. So this is sort of the polar opposite to the Tachyon Lance. So this is doing more damage to shields, but less damage to armor. So if you get invaded by someone like the Unbidden, the Unbidden Crisis has no armor, they are just shields and hull points, potentially this is an option for you. And then the third option, and this is my personal favorite option, is the Focused Arc Emitter. So again, it has a range of 150. What this guy has is 100% shield and 100% armor penetration. That sounds incredible, and it is incredible, particularly when you're up against fleets that are heavily shielded, heavily armored, like the Contingency, for example, which is the third crisis. They have shields and armor generally equally. The thing to watch out for with the Focused Arc Emitter is if you see the damage, that ranges from 1 to 1700. So you could have 10 ships fire and you could do less than 100 damage with all those 10 ships. In which case, that's potentially an issue. That potentially costs you the fight. So what I tend to do is, depending on how far along I am in research, if I've researched energy weapon damage, let's say, less than 10 times, 10 is an arbitrary number, but it's around 10 times I tend to switch, then I'm using Tachyon Lancers. You'll see the damage, the lowest possible damage on that is much higher, it's 800. But by the time I get to 10 energy damage increase in the research section, I'm moving to Focused Arc Emitter, because then I can just bypass all the shields, all the armors, and I can forget about it to an extent. So if we're talking late game battleships, all of my battleships are going to have Focused Arc Emitters, with the exception unless we're fighting against the Scourge, in which case I'll take the Tachyon Lance, because they're still getting the damage bonuses, but they can cut through the armor, and then 50% damage to hull, so they'll be significantly stronger. The other thing to consider when you're kitting out these battleships is the sort of enemies you'll be fighting. So I quite like to run two different types of battleships. I run what you're looking at now, an artillery battleship, and then I'll run a hangar battleship as well, and I'll tend to build them in equal numbers. So to fill out this battleship design, we will go 2 neutron launchers and 2 kinetic artilleries. So it's super balanced. It allows you to fight pretty much any fleet in the galaxy and have some sort of success. You're not going to edge one way or another. Your fleet's not going to beat one guy massively and then get destroyed by another guy. It's nice and balanced. So the neutron launchers are sort of like nuclear missile cannons, if you like. They've got a massive range. Their range is 130. They do a lot of damage, but they're pretty poor against shields. Their armor and hull damage is fantastic. So what you'll find with these, maybe the first wave of these doesn't do too much damage because it's against the shields, but the second wave, which is a 16-second cooldown, will likely do damage, because these guys, the kinetic artillery, will hopefully by that point have smashed through the shields. So these guys are like the Mac cannons in Halo, if anyone's ever played. I'm sure you guys have played Halo. These guys are like the Mac cannons. So they're absolutely massive kinetic power drivers. These will take a lump of metal, hopefully tungsten, fire it halfway across the solar system, and pound into the enemy ships. The things to note about these are the range is slightly smaller than the launchers, which is why you'll really need the second salvo of launcher rounds to get these guys, neutron launchers, to get the most out of them. But while these guys are on cooldown, rest assured these launchers are firing. Their cooldown is much shorter at 6.4 rather than 16, and they're doing 100% damage to shields. So these guys are going to tear through shields super fast, and then these guys are going to finish them off. And remember as well that these guns are mostly a backup. The majority of your damage late game is going to come from this. The range on this is fantastic. The majority of your damage, most of the ships you come up against are going to be destroyed before these things even get into range, which is a good thing. These are backup weapons. Because of this, and because of the tactics that I use anyway, this is really, really important. The reason for this is, if this is your most powerful asset and it has a range of 150, you don't want to be steaming towards the enemy to get to medium range. That is a terrible idea. Even though it gives you an increased fire rate of 20% and a chance to hit of 20%, the vast majority of fleets that you're going to be up against are going to be corvettes, destroyers, the smaller ships that just want to swarm you and get on you. So they want to rush you as quickly as possible and start the evasion. If you're rushing towards them as well, it's just like driving two trains together. It's going to be chaos. So for that reason, even on the artillery battleships, I choose carrier. Now what carrier does, it forces the ship to stay at extreme range and fire its long range weapons. So it stays at range 150. The only weapon it has that will fire at 150 is the focused arc emitter. But rest assured, the enemy fleet is closing on you. All this does is delay. You'll get another couple of shots off with your arc emitter. You'll destroy another couple of ships before the enemy fleet even gets to you. And trust me, when you're fighting against crisis fleets with sort of 1-2 million fleet power, that is what you want. It's about weapons range and destroying as much of the enemy fleet before it gets to you as possible. So we go carrier. The other ship design we use later in the game, it's pre-built under courage, is the carrier. So exactly the same in terms of how I build it, other than the fact that we go for a carrier core. The reason we go for a carrier core is because these guys launch super early. You're setting it to range 150 again, so it's going to chill right in the back line. It's going to be firing off the focused arc emitter. Your strike planes are flying in, they're chipping away at the shields. They're doing a whole lot of the work before these missiles even get into range. With the carrier core, it also comes with 2 picket slots and 2 small guns. The small guns, I go 1 laser and 1 cannon. I mean, at this point in the game, I don't even think these guys really even see action. However, the picket points will, depending on who you're fighting against. If you're fighting against the Scourge, I recommend you build probably more carriers with point defense than you do artillery, for the simple reason that the Scourge have an absolute ton of missiles and little strike craft that they send against you. Point defense is going to be so important. So generally speaking, that is what you'll get. You'll see this list of fleets I got down on the right hand side. The majority of these fleets will have roughly half and half of each different type of battleship. The carrier core battleship and the artillery core battleship. Okay, the last most important ship to be looking at when you're building epic fleets in Stellaris is gonna be the Titan. So the Titan is very similar to a battleship in how it's set up. You've got the X slot, and then you've got the core. So it has a couple more weapons than a battleship. It's got two more large weapons. But by far and away the most important is this thing here, the Peridition Beam. Now, if you look at the damage, 5,000 to 10,000 damage, and that's without any sort of adjustment. That's without research tacked onto it. That is one-shotting ships. That is potentially even one-shotting a Titan battleship. If you look at the hull points over here on ship stats, this guy is doing minus 25 shield damage, 50% armor damage, 25% shield damage. Depending on how much armor and shields that the ships you're fighting against have, this guy is I mean, bear in mind this is a Titan. If we look at a battleship, it's only got 3,000 hull points. All of this is under 10k. I mean, yeah, this is one-shotting battleships. It's tearing them apart. It's so important. I like to have one Titan per fleet. However, late game, you're probably swarming them all together anyway, so, it's not too much of an issue. I wouldn't say put all your Titans in one fleet, though, for the reason of the aura that Titans have. So in addition to the other bits and pieces that Titans have, they have this aura at the bottom. You have minus 20% shield, ship fire rate minus, emergency jump cooldown. I'm not too sure why you'd need that. Or you can have defensive, which is increase your own fire rate, increases tracking, or daily hull and armor regeneration. This is obviously to a point personal choice. Depends who you're fighting against. Minus 20% shield hit points is obviously massive. So is the increased fire rate. Generally, it's personal choice. I wouldn't worry too much about minus ship fire rate and this one though, because the whole point of these fleets is you want to smash the enemy fleet before they even get to shoot back. So having a minus 10% fire rate, you're not going to need it because you don't want to be getting into prolonged fights with this sort of fleet setup. You want to be doing short, quick, smash the enemy fleet, get out. So that's your Titan for you. We also have Juggernauts and Colossus. So these are, you can't build these into fleets, but they do have their place. Juggernauts are essentially flying shipyards. In a similar way, they're not super powerful on their own. I'll say that now. Their evasion is terrible. You don't really want to be sending this guy out. As cool as it sounds, a Juggernaut, you don't really want to be sending this guy out by himself. What he does have, though, is auras similar to the Titan. There are two that are extremely powerful. The first one is the strikecraft damage, strikecraft speed. So if you're using ships predominantly with strikecraft, that is incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. However, it's not as powerful as this one. Ship weapons range increased by 40%. 40%. So that what that means is that your arc emitters and your Titan weapons that are one-shotting ships, by the way, 40% increased range. The whole way that we're winning battles late game is by decimating the enemy fleets before they even come into range. This is absolutely incredible. And what this will allow you to do is, if you have, say, a 400k fleet and you're fighting, I don't know, a 1 million hit point, 1 million fleet power crisis, this will massively swing it in your favor. It's a huge bonus. The other ones that are interesting, I mean, hyper jump charge time, sure, maybe we're doing some sort of hit and run, but yeah, it's really, really, you're not going to use this very often. And then offensive auras, point defense, I mean, yeah, okay. And orbital bombardment damage, I mean, they're basically, it's these two guys. These are the two that you need to look at. The other thing I forgot to point out on the Titan is make sure you set this to carrier. Because what you don't want, Titans as default are set to artillery. So imagine you've got all of your battleships at 150 and then your Titan just steaming off to get in 80 range, which seems like point blank range. And then the entire enemy fleet is, oh look, we've got a ship, we've got a dude out of line, he gets decimated, you lose your Titan. It's a pain. The final ship that we're going to look at, not really to do with building an epic fleet, but it's here, so we're going to do it, is the Colossus. This is absolutely useless in fighting enemy ships, but what it can do is crack planets. So you've got three different options: the World Cracker, the Global Pacifier, and the Neutron Sweep. The World Cracker does what it says on the tin. It's like the Death Star at Star Wars. It will crack planets, and it looks pretty cool when it does it. The Neutron Sweep is a sort of I was going to say non-lethal. That is definitely not true. It's a non-planet destructive super weapon. So it basically irradiates the planet and kills all living things on it. I mean, for some reason, Stellaris civilizations hate you less if you neutron sweep their planets rather than crack their planets. I mean, in both circumstances, they're ruined. So I guess over 1,000 years, maybe the radiation will subside, and that therefore makes it better. But yeah, okay. And then finally, the Global Pacifier, which is frankly something other than to get the achievement I have never felt the need to use. This basically puts a shield around a planet. You may or may not have come across shield worlds, but this basically puts a shield around a planet and seals the owners inside. So, yeah. World Cracker is probably the way to go. It's just a little bit more fun, really. Okay, so now that we've been through each ship individually, I just wanted to run you through the sort of fleet power that you're going to get late game, and for that, I've set up a little line. So right at the start, we've got our corvette. Now, if you imagine at the start of the game, you'll have 20 of these, and their fleet power will be 400, and you'll be feeling a little bit mugged off when one corvette in the year 2600 is 2.2k and could destroy your entire fleet. But this is him. You'll see we've got the 3 small guns at the top, and he's looking pretty cool. This is the Imperial ship set, and they do look very, very good close up. They're very blocky, though, I find, especially at the back. Moving on to the destroyer, so as you can see, it's a little bit bigger than the corvette. You can see we've got the 2 small guns, the 1 medium gun, and then the 2 small guns. He's set up, looking pretty good as well. Moving along to the cruiser now. So the cruiser starts to look a little bit more like what I would say, a big old spaceship should look like. So our cruiser has a lot of medium weapons and then 2 small weapons at the back. This has this really cool nose thing sticking out. It makes it look like it should be some sort of big Mac cannon or something, but sadly not. Interesting to note that the cruiser is roughly double the fleet strength of the destroyer. Interesting to note that the corvette is basically the same as the destroyer. Destroyer's not that good. And then we move on to the battleship. So as you can see, the battleship is significantly bigger than the cruiser. It's the Titan that we'll come to in a second. And as well, the fleet power is also significantly stronger. So we've got the large weapon. This is going to be the kinetic cannon, I think. And then we've got some. Oh, these are point defense guns, I think, because this is a courage class, which I think has a hangar bay. Yes. So we've got the large. That's the big neutron launcher at the back. We've got some picket defense guns and some small guns. And then I wonder if you can't really see it. So this little red thing here is where all the little fighter plane jet thingies come out of. And obviously you can see the weird looking array of engines. I wonder if that's symmetrical for a reason or because it looks cool. But anyway, that's your battleship. Significantly stronger than your cruiser. Significantly. Because you have access to the large weapons and the spinal mount. And then we move on to the Titan. And I mean, the Titans just look so cool. I mean, it's so much larger than the battleship. Obviously, you're limited to the amount that you can make. At this point in the game, we can make 11 Titans, which is pretty cool. So you can more or less have one per fleet. I mean, this guy is just absolutely massive. He is a beast. 50k fleet power by himself. I mean, if you take this guy by himself into the year 2300, he's probably the strongest thing out there. He's decimating, he's decimating civilizations by himself. He's absolutely huge. He's got some cool little purple jets going on. Maybe I paused it while he was still moving. I mean, that looks wicked, doesn't it? And as you can see, his array of beastly cannons going down the front. And then his Perdition beam at the front, which just looks super cool. Okay, we've then got the Juggernaut. So this guy, smaller for some reason than the Titan, but whatever. It's basically a giant shipyard, and we'll pump out your. That's the back of it. That's the front of it. There we go. Doesn't it look a little bit like Thanos' ship? I wonder if that's by design. Interesting. So yeah, this guy will pump out your hangar bays, and obviously you've got the small weapon slots and stuff like that. And then over here we've got the Colossus. The Colossus seems to have been in combat, and yeah, this guy looks awesome. I will do a short clip at the end of the Colossus cracking a world, because that'll just be a good shot, I think. I wonder if we can crack our own world. And then the final thing I wanted to show you was what representative fleet power looks like late game. So we've got two things here. We've got 2 battleship fleets, both with level 10 captains, both with level 10 officers. This one has 28 battleships. We're not a militaristic empire, so we don't get the bonus. 230 is the largest that we can have. So this is just 28 battleships. Simple as that. This guy is level 10, giving us the 30% fire rate, and we have a fleet power of 526,000, which is pretty tasty. This guy is 26 battleships and 1 Titan. So you sacrifice 2 battleships for a Titan, and interestingly, at this point in the game, it's the same. There was a time previous to this, in a patch previous to this, where Titan weapons didn't get a bonus from the energy increase, but they do now. Anyway, so this is more or less the same. I don't know why. Maybe it's the difference between the captains, although, frankly, I would take 20% ship weapons range over Trickster and Engineer any day of the week, but there you go. And then by far one of the coolest fleets that we've got, particularly in this game, is the Galactic Defense Force. So this is a fleet of 50 battleships. Again, we've got a level 10 admiral leading this one for a cool 950,000 fleet points. This guy, he can do whatever he wants. He can go wherever he wants. He can do whatever he wants. There is nothing in the universe that is even going to come close to this. This guy is going to walk into a room. You're going to get 50 arc emitters go off and obliterate anything that comes near it. So I think that concludes our how to build epic fleets. These 3 here are epic fleets. They are primarily battleships with the odd Titan, and that is what I would recommend doing. Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed this. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll leave the outro of I'll give you an outro of the World Cracker blowing some stuff up. If you enjoyed the content, please like, subscribe, all the normal stuff. I hope you did. Thank you. Peace.
Science Division reports a new breakthrough.